Nobody saw the moment. When Steph Curry thought about giving up, alone in the locker room with his swollen ankle and heavy heart, he asked himself, "What if my body can't handle it?" Before becoming a legend, he almost gave up in silence. And that's where the true story begins. The Golden State Warriors' locker room had that familiar aroma of sweat, muscle ointment, and resin that every basketball arena carries. The fluorescent lights cast long shadows over the metal lockers, creating a stark contrast with the glamour and glitter that the public associates with the NBA. Steph Curry sat alone on the wooden bench, his shoes still carrying traces from the court, where, minutes before, he had been just another ordinary player. Not a star, not a legend. Just a man fighting against his own body, against the pain that nobody saw when the cameras turned off. The Chase Center Arena, normally deafening with fans' cheers, seemed distant now. The noise reduced to an indistinct echo in the corridors, while, within that small space of introspection, a deafening silence reigned. A silence that spoke louder than any crowd, any excited announcer, any sports headline. "Maybe this isn't for me." The phrase didn't leave his lips. It remained floating in his thoughts as he massaged his right ankle, already swollen and acquiring shades of purple and yellow that contrasted with his skin. The fourth serious sprain in just 2 years. Each movement sent waves of pain that made his face involuntarily contract. It wasn't a conference final, not even a playoff game. It was just another ordinary night in the regular season, one of those that history doesn't record, that cameras don't capture in slow motion, that don't make it into highlight compilations, but that silently define an athlete's character. And perhaps that's why it was so crucial. The pain in his ankle was sharp, but something deeper was bothering him. A pain that doctors couldn't diagnose, that MRIs couldn't detect. It was the weight of expectation, the shadow of doubt, the fear that all greats secretly carry. What if I'm not good enough? What if my body simply can't handle it? "You are Steph Curry," he whispered to himself, as if trying to convince himself. "You are Del Curry's son." But at that moment, the surname weighed more than it elevated. Outside, journalists were already typing on their laptops the verdict of that night. Mediocre statistics, forgettable performance, and, inevitably, they would mention Curry left the court in the third quarter with problems in his right ankle. The narrative of fragility was being built, brick by brick, article by article. A terrible label for any athlete, but particularly devastating for someone who had always been considered too small, too fragile, too unlikely for the stage where he stood. He closed his eyes, not to escape the pain, but to find something beyond it. This wasn't the first time Steph faced doubt. In fact, doubt was his old companion, a shadow that had followed him since long before the NBA spotlight. Akron, Ohio, isn't a city known for its beauty or monuments. It's a city of workers, factories, ordinary people who get up early and go to bed exhausted. The frequently gray sky seems to weigh on the shoulders of its inhabitants, as if constantly reminding them of life's limitations and difficulties. It was in this city, forged in steel and sweat, in the same Akron General Hospital where LeBron James would be born years later, that Steph Curry came into the world on March 14, 1988. A boy too small, too quiet for the extraordinary destiny that awaited him. The coincidence that united the cradles of two future basketball legends seemed like an irony of fate. While LeBron would grow up as an undeniable prodigy, a body of mythical proportions with extraordinary abilities, Steph would always be the opposite. The skinny boy with the strange shot, the NBA player's son who didn't seem to have inherited the physical build necessary to follow in his father's footsteps. Del Curry was respected in the league, an excellent shooter who made his career primarily with the Charlotte Hornets. Being Del's son opened doors, allowed access to NBA backstage, conversations with great players, valuable advice. But it also created expectations and, more importantly, inevitable comparisons. "He has the name, but not the game," commented a high school basketball coach after observing young Steph at a ENI summer clinic. "The kid is skilled, but look at him. He's a stick. He'll never handle the physical contact." Steph heard these comments. Not directly, of course, but he perceived them in looks, in expressions of poorly disguised disappointment when he entered the court in youth tournaments. He saw it in the genuine surprise when he managed to stand out. He felt it in the awkward silence when his father was approached by fans, and beside him, Steph seemed more like any teenager than the heir to a sports legacy. At home, he kept his hurts to himself. Not out of pride, but out of respect. Del and his mother, Sonia, never pressured him to be like his father. On the contrary, they encouraged all their children to find their own journey. But Steph loved basketball with a passion that transcended height, weight, or physical strength. It was a quiet love, manifested not in grand declarations, but in the consistency with which he woke up before dawn to practice shots in the backyard. "You don't need to be like me," Del said once, finding his teenage son training under the light rain of a winter morning in Charlotte. "You need to be yourself." Steph just nodded, without interrupting his shooting sequence. 1, 2, 3, 4, 50 consecutive shots. The mechanics weren't perfect yet, far from it. But there was something hypnotic in the repetition, in the pursuit of perfection that he knew was somewhere inside him. The rejection from major universities was the hardest blow. When it was time for college scholarships, the basketball powerhouses stayed away. Duke wasn't interested. North Carolina, practically his backyard, didn't even look. Virginia Tech, where his father had shined, offered only a walk-on spot without a scholarship. The small Davidson College, an academically respected institution, but almost irrelevant on the college basketball map, was the only one that saw beyond his fragile physique. Coach Bob McKillop saw what others couldn't. It wasn't Steph's body that made him special. It was his mind, his court vision, his instinctive understanding of spaces and angles. "You see that kid?" McKillop asked an assistant during one of Steph's first practices at Davidson. "He'll never be the strongest or the fastest, but he's the only one who never makes the same mistake twice." It was at Davidson that Steph began to discover that, to be noticed in a world that valued spectacular physicality, he would need to be not just good, but extraordinary at what he could control: precision, intelligence, and work. Davidson College wasn't a springboard to fame. It was a small liberal arts institution in a quiet North Carolina town. The gym held only 5,000 people, tiny by American college basketball standards. There were no regular national broadcasts, no jerseys sold in sporting goods stores. It was a place almost invisible on the basketball radar, and that became Steph's greatest blessing. Away from the spotlight, he found space to fail, to experiment, to build not just a game, but an identity. McKillop, a meticulous and disciplined coach, saw in the freshman not just raw talent, but a spirit that aligned with his own philosophy. "Basketball is poetry in motion," McKillop used to say. "It's not about who jumps highest. It's about who dances best with the ball." And Steph was determined to become the best dancer on the court. The days at Davidson followed an almost monastic routine: classes in the morning, practice in the afternoon, studies at night. And in moments when other students rested or socialized, Steph was in the gym, alone, repeating shots until his arms ached, until his hands developed calluses that sometimes bled. It wasn't masochism, it was necessity. It was the deliberate construction of a weapon that would compensate for all his physical disadvantages. A shot so precise, so reliable, that it would become lethal. 100 perfect shots, he would say to himself every morning. Not 100 shots. 100 perfect shots. The difference was subtle, but crucial. If the mechanics were slightly wrong, if the elbow wasn't perfectly aligned, if the trajectory wasn't exactly what he visualized, it didn't count. He would restart the count. This perfectionism wasn't born from nowhere. It came from the early understanding that, for someone with his physique, the margin for error was non-existent. Taller and stronger players could compensate for bad nights with dunks, rebounds, physical defense. Steph didn't have that luxury. His art needed to be impeccable. The world would discover this dedication in 2008, when Davidson, the small, unknown college, reached the Elite Eight of the NCAA tournament. Suddenly, the spotlight found Steph Curry, the skinny point guard who seemed to score from anywhere on the court, who played with a combination of childlike joy and surgical precision. Against Gonzaga, Georgetown, and Wisconsin, all absolute favorites, Steph defied odds and expectations, not with brute force or spectacular athleticism, but with something rarer, technical mastery and unwavering courage. "He plays as if he knows something that no one else does," commented an announcer during one of those games. And perhaps he did. Perhaps he knew that basketball, like life, is not just for the physically predestined. It's also for those who refuse to accept the limitations that the world imposes on them. When the Golden State Warriors selected Steph Curry as the 7th pick in the 2009 NBA draft, the reaction was lukewarm. The Warriors were a historically unsuccessful franchise, known more for poor decisions than success. And Curry? Well, he had proven to be an excellent college player, but the NBA was another world. Too fragile. One-dimensional shooter. Won't be able to defend athletic league point guards. Too big a risk. The comments multiplied on sports shows, in newspaper columns, in bar conversations. The NBA was the league of physical strength, of athletic explosion. It was the league of LeBron James and Dwight Howard, of Derrick Rose and Russell Westbrook, men who seemed sculpted from marble, capable of extraordinary physical feats. And there was Steph Curry, still looking like a teenager, still with that body that many considered inadequate for the highest level of world basketball. The first years in the league seemed to prove the skeptics right. Not that Steph was bad, far from it. He showed flashes of brilliance, periods of excellence. But then came the injuries. Right ankle, left ankle, right ankle again, knee problems. His body seemed to confirm what everyone feared. He simply wouldn't withstand the physical marathon that is an NBA season. In the 2011-12 season, Steph played only 26 of the 66 possible games. His right ankle was a ticking time bomb. Each landing after a shot, each sharp change of direction was a moment of apprehension. For him, for the coaches, for the fans who were beginning to believe in that young man with an easy smile and lethal shot. It was in this season that the non-televised moment, the moment that few know about, occurred. In a meeting room at the Warriors Training Center, doctors, executives, and the coach gathered to discuss Steph's future. The diagnosis was concerning. His ankle condition could be chronic. It could shorten his career. It could limit his potential. "Perhaps we should consider other options," suggested one of the executives, choosing his words carefully. Everyone knew what this meant. Trade Steph while he still had some market value, before he became known as that talented point guard who couldn't stay healthy. The meeting ended without a final decision, but the buzz had already begun behind the scenes of the league. Steph's name appeared in trade rumors. Milwaukee, Charlotte, Minnesota, anywhere he could start over, perhaps with less pressure, perhaps with lowered expectations. Steph knew about these rumors. In the interconnected world of the NBA, few secrets remain guarded for long. He didn't comment publicly, didn't explode, didn't demand explanations. Instead, he did what he always did in the face of adversity. He worked harder. He consulted biomechanics specialists, completely redesigned his strengthening program, changed his diet, his sleep, his recovery routine. Every aspect of his athletic life was examined, questioned, optimized, and most importantly, he revisited his shooting mechanics, not to change it completely. It was already extraordinarily efficient, but to make it even more economical, to minimize the impact on his ankles, so he could continue to be lethal without self-destructing in the process. "I'm not going to give up," he told himself during one of those long days of rehabilitation, when pain made him question everything. "I'm going to change the game, or I'll go down trying." Mark Jackson arrived as the Warriors' coach in 2011, bringing with him an unwavering faith and a clear vision. A former point guard, Jackson understood the game from a perspective that few coaches possessed. And he saw in Steph not just a talented shooter, but a potential revolutionary. "You're going to change the way basketball is played," Jackson told Curry during one of their first conversations. Not as a vague prediction, but as a certainty based on what he saw daily in practice. To many outside observers, it seemed like an exaggeration. Motivational hyperbole from a coach trying to extract the most from a talented but physically limited player. After all, how could someone change the game without the explosive athleticism that defined the era? What these observers didn't realize was that a silent revolution was already underway. Not just in Steph's game, but in his mentality. The 2012-13 season marked the beginning of this transformation. Physically stronger, technically more refined, Steph began to expand the limits of what was considered a good shot. Traditional basketball preached that three-point shots should come from structured plays, preferably with feet planted and after receiving passes. They were situational weapons, not the backbone of an offense. Steph challenged this orthodoxy. His shots came from anywhere, at any time, in any game context. After dribbling, in transition, with defenders stuck to him, from distances that made opposing coaches shake their heads, in disbelief. But the most revolutionary aspect wasn't the quantity, or even the difficulty of the shots. It was the efficiency. Steph wasn't just shooting a lot. He was converting at percentages that defied the logic of the game. The Warriors, a historically irrelevant franchise, began to win games, to fill arenas, to appear in prime time on national TV, not playing like the traditional great teams, but in their own style, fueled by their point guard's supernatural shooting ability. "This isn't sustainable," the analysts said. "It's just a phase. The defense will adjust." But the revolution didn't stop. In fact, it only accelerated. In 2014, Steve Kerr replaced Mark Jackson as the Warriors' coach. Kerr, Michael Jordan's former teammate on the Bulls and an excellent shooter in his playing days, brought offensive systems that further expanded Steph's influence. It was no longer just about brilliant individual shots, but an entire game philosophy based on the spacing, created by the constant threat of his shot. The 2014-15 season marked the definitive rise. The Warriors dominated the regular season and won the NBA championship, the first in 40 years for the franchise. Steph was named MVP, Most Valuable Player. The supreme recognition that that boy considered too fragile had become the best player on the planet. But it was the following season, 2015-16, that elevated everything to another level. Steph seemed to be playing a different sport. His numbers were absurd: 30.1 points per game, 50.4% field goal percentage, 45.4% on three-pointers, 90.8% on free throws. The Warriors set the historical record for wins in a regular season with 73 wins and 9 losses. Steph became the first unanimous MVP in NBA history. All 131 possible votes. No dissent, no doubt. The boy that nobody wanted had become the player that nobody could deny. What the public didn't know was that, even at the height of glory, the pain hadn't completely disappeared. The ankles still bothered him on certain days. There were nights when he took anti-inflammatories before games, nights when he spent hours in the ice bath after spectacular performances. But this was never a narrative he wanted to share. Not out of misplaced pride, but because Steph never saw himself as a victim of his circumstances. He always saw himself as the architect of his own destiny. There is a cruel paradox in professional sports. Sometimes, it's the greatest achievements that set the stage for the most painful defeats. The Warriors' 2015-16 season, historically dominant, ended in the most bitter way possible. In the NBA Finals against LeBron James's Cleveland Cavaliers, Golden State opened 3-1 in the best-of-7 series. They were one win away from crowning the best regular season in history with the title that seemed inevitable. Then, the unthinkable happened. The Cavaliers won 3 consecutive games, including the decisive Game 7 at the Warriors' home. It was the first time in NBA Finals history that a team reversed a 3-1 disadvantage. And it happened with the very team that had set the record for wins. Steph Curry, the unanimous MVP, had performances below his stratospheric standard in those final games. Failed at crucial moments, made uncommon mistakes. His body, once again, was showing signs of exhaustion after the marathon of an entire season playing at a superhuman level. In the locker room after Game 7, when the doors closed and the cameras left, Steph cried. They weren't discreet, contained tears. They were deep sobs, the kind of crying that comes from the gut. It was more than a sports defeat. It was the collapse of a perfect narrative that he had helped build. It was the most devastating moment of my career, he would confess years later. We felt that the title was ours, that history would be ours, and then everything collapsed. But even in the midst of pain, something extraordinary was happening. Steph wasn't just suffering a defeat, he was learning the most valuable lesson of his career. True greatness isn't in invincibility, but in resilience. The summer of 2016 could have been a period of lamentation, doubt, questioning. Instead, it became a period of reinvention. When everyone expected the Warriors to try to repeat the record season formula, the franchise made a seismic move. They signed Kevin Durant, one of the greatest offensive talents in basketball history. Durant's arrival meant profound changes. For Steph, in particular, it represented a transformation of his role. The offense would no longer be completely centered on him. There would be fewer shots, fewer individual records, less exclusive spotlight. Many superstars would have resisted this change, would have seen the arrival of a player of Durant's caliber as a threat, a diminishing of their status. Steph saw it as an opportunity. not just to win, although that was important, but to grow as a leader, as a teammate, as a man. "I want to win championships," he said during the press conference that introduced Durant, "and I want to do it playing the right way, being who I am." This seemingly simple statement contained a depth that many didn't perceive. For Steph, the right way was never just about game strategies. It was about values, about character, about leaving a legacy that transcended statistics. The results were undeniable. The Warriors, with Steph and Durant leading one of the most talented teams ever assembled, won the NBA titles in 2017 and 2018. But for Steph, these achievements represented something beyond new trophies for his collection. They represented an evolution in his journey. He had proven he could be the absolute center of a championship team in 2015. Now, he was proving he could share the stage, adapt his game, subjugate his ego for a greater good. It was a different form of leadership, less visible in statistics, but equally powerful. While the sports world discussed shots, titles, and records, Steph was silently building a life that transcended the lines of the court. At home, with his wife Isha and his children, he was simply Daddy. Not the NBA star, not the face of multiple advertising campaigns, not the sports revolutionary. Just a father who changed diapers between playoff games, who made a point of being present at important moments in family life, who cooked pancakes on Sunday mornings. "Basketball is what I do, not who I am," he frequently repeated in interviews. Not as an empty slogan, but as a deep conviction that guided his choices. This separation between identity and profession allowed Steph to maintain a rare perspective in the world of sports stardom. When success came, it didn't consume him. When fame exploded, it didn't transform him. When the millionaire contracts arrived, they didn't distance him from his fundamental values. His Christian faith, frequently mentioned but rarely explored in depth by the sports media, is central to understanding the man behind the myth. For Steph, basketball was never just a means for personal glory or material wealth. It was a platform, a gift to be used with gratitude and purpose. That's why, before each game, he taps his chest and points to the sky, not as a gesture of superstition or an empty ritual, but as a reminder to himself of where his strength, his motivation, his center comes from. "Anyone can be a hero," he once told a group of children at one of his many community events. "You don't need to shoot like me. You just need to find something you love, work hard at it, and never let anyone tell you you're not good enough." Coming from someone else, they might seem like generic motivational words. Coming from Steph Curry, they carried the weight of authenticity. After all, he had lived that story. He had been the child that nobody believed would go far. He had been the teenager rejected by the major universities. He had been the professional considered too fragile to make an era. And he had proven everyone wrong, not with arrogance or resentment, but with silent work and unwavering faith. When the Warriors faced the Boston Celtics in the NBA Finals of 2022, many believed the championship window of the dynasty was closed. Kevin Durant had departed years earlier, seeking new challenges in Brooklyn. Klay Thompson, Steph's faithful shield-bearer, was returning from two devastating injuries: a rupture of the anterior cruciate ligament, followed by a rupture of the Achilles tendon, that kept him sidelined for more than 900 days. Draymond Green, although still tactically brilliant, was no longer the dominant and explosive defender he once was. And Steph? Well, he was 34 years old. In the NBA, this age usually marks the beginning of decline, especially for players whose game depends on speed and explosion. The previous 2 years had been difficult for him. A hand fracture in 2019. A 2019-20 season practically lost. The Warriors, once an undisputed dynasty, had fallen to the bottom of the standings. Many analysts declared, "The Warriors as we knew them are finished." It was 2 years hearing we were done, Steph confided to a close friend. 2 years hearing that my championship window had closed, that it was time to think about a dignified career end, not new beginnings. But there was something these analysts didn't understand. For Steph Curry, difficulties were never obstacles. They were always fuel. The finals against Boston showed a different Steph Curry. No less skilled, certainly no less precise in the shot that revolutionized basketball. But there was a new dimension to his game, a wisdom that only experience brings, a deeper understanding of the rhythms and flows of the game. It was as if each adversity faced, each ankle sprain, each doubt, each bitter defeat had added a new layer to his understanding of basketball and life. In Game 4, with the Warriors at a disadvantage in the series and playing in Boston, one of the league's most hostile environments, Steph produced a masterclass of 43 points and 10 rebounds that silenced the arena and rewrote the series' narratives. The performance was so transcendental that even Boston fans, traditionally relentless, couldn't help but appreciate the greatness they were witnessing. It wasn't just the scoring that impressed, it was the absolute refusal to accept defeat, to bow to circumstances. Each shot seemed loaded not just with impeccable technique, but with the entire history of a boy who grew up being constantly underestimated. "That shot in the fourth quarter, over 2 defenders," commented an analyst after the game. "It's not something you teach. It's something that comes from the soul." And perhaps this is the central point to understanding Steph Curry. His game transcends technique. Each movement, each decision on the court is an expression of his inner journey, a journey of unwavering faith, of silent perseverance, of accepting limitations as part of the path, not its end. It was the same spirit that had guided him since childhood, now manifest on a global stage, with millions watching. The boy nobody wanted had become the man nobody could stop. The Warriors won those finals in 6 games, and Steph was unanimously chosen as Finals MVP, the only individual award missing from his impressive collection. The vote was unanimous, without a single dissenting vote. In a world of divided opinions, Steph's greatness in that series was one of the rare unanimities. When the final whistle sounded and the celebration began, Steph knelt at center court at TD Garden in Boston. The arena's buzz, his teammates' shouts, everything seemed to fade for a moment. He was alone with his thoughts, with his gratitude, with the full understanding of that moment's significance. Tears came freely, running down his face as he covered his eyes with his hands. They weren't tears just of joy for the achievement, although there was certainly that. They were tears that told a story, the story from Akron to the world, from the skinny boy to the basketball revolutionary, from constant doubt to unwavering certainty. "You did it," he whispered to himself, in a moment of intimacy captured by cameras, but fully understood only by those who knew his entire journey. As he celebrated with his teammates, Steph looked to the stands. There were his parents, Dell and Sonia, his wife Isha, his children Riley, Ryan, and Cannon. The people who knew him not as Steph Curry, the NBA superstar, but simply as Steph. The son who called after every game, win or lose. The husband who still planned romantic dates amid an exhausting season. The father who made sure to be present for important moments, regardless of how busy his schedule was. For these people, the impossible shots and records were merely the external manifestation of something they had always known, Steph's greatness was never just in his talents, but in his character. The fourth NBA title, won when many already considered the Warriors dynasty over, cemented Steph Curry's legacy in the pantheon of greatest players of all time. But while the world debated his place in historical lists, best shooter of all time? Top 10 of all time? The most influential since Michael Jordan? Steph himself seemed uninterested in these discussions. "The rankings are for you," he said in an interview with his characteristic unpretentious smile. "I just want to play basketball the way I know how, with the people I love, for as long as possible." This answer, seemingly simple, captures the essence of the Steph Curry phenomenon. In an era of constant self-promotion and calculated image-building, he offered something different: authenticity. He never tried to be bigger than he is, never presented himself as anything beyond a man passionate about the game, blessed with extraordinary talents he developed through tireless work. And perhaps this is Steph Curry's true legacy. Not just the impossible shots, the titles, the records that will certainly lead him to the Basketball Hall of Fame, but the way he achieved all this, with grace, with humility, with a faith that transcends the visible. On the court, he redefined the boundaries of shooting. He showed that the three-point line wasn't just another marking on the court, but a new horizon of possibilities. Before Curry, the three-point shot was a situational weapon. After him, it became the gravitational center of modern basketball. Entire teams were rebuilt to emulate the Warriors' style. Young players grew up dreaming of shooting like Steph. The very geometry of the game was altered. Spacing, defensive strategies, offensive philosophies, everything had to adapt to the revolution he unleashed. But beyond the court, Steph also revolutionized the concept of sports superstar. In a sport often dominated by explosive egos and constant self-promotion, he offered an alternative. He showed that it's possible to be extraordinary without losing humility, that it's possible to change the game without changing who you are, that it's possible to find greatness not despite limitations, but through them. "I think what I admire most about Steph isn't the shots," commented Steve Kerr, his coach with the Warriors. "It's the joy with which he plays. It's how he treats every person in the organization, from the janitor to the team owner, with the same respect. It's how he never, not for 1 second, allowed success to transform him into someone different from the kid we knew at the beginning. This purity of character, this constancy of values amid the storms of fame and success, is perhaps his most impressive achievement. In a world that constantly pressures celebrities to become caricatures of themselves, Steph remained firmly anchored in who he is. In his training camps for young players, Steph often ends sessions with a simple but profound message: work hard, believe in yourselves, and remember that basketball is just a game. It's what you do, not who you are. These are words he doesn't just say, but lives. Every day, every practice, every game. When basketball history books are written, Steph Curry will occupy a special place. Not just as the greatest shooter of all time, although that title will hardly be contested, but as the man who reminded us that the true measure of greatness isn't in what you achieve, but in how you achieve it. As the unlikely icon who showed that physical strength isn't the only path to dominance. As the silent revolutionary who transformed the game not with bombastic declarations, but with constant work and genuine passion. And that, sometimes, life's greatest shots aren't those that go in the basket. They're the ones you have the courage to try, even when everyone says you'll miss. When Steph Curry walks the streets of Oakland, San Francisco, or any city he visits, The impact of his revolution is visible in parks and courts around the world. Children who once dreamed of dunking like LeBron now practice shots from absurd distances, trying to imitate the controlled imbalance, mechanical precision, and unwavering confidence that define the Curry style. He democratized greatness, observed a sports analyst. Before Curry, if you weren't born with a height of 2 meters and an extraordinary physique, your chances in the NBA were limited. He showed there are other paths to the top. This effect goes beyond sports. In schools, companies, communities, Steph's story resonates as a modern parable about the power of perseverance, authenticity, and faith. It's a story that speaks directly to the heart of the human experience, the desire to overcome limitations, to prove skeptics wrong, to transform apparent weaknesses into definitive strengths. In 2022, after winning his 4th title, Steph formalized his commitment to this mission by expanding his Eat, Learn, Play Foundation, an initiative created with his wife Isha to combat food insecurity, improve access to education, and create safe spaces for children to practice sports. It wasn't just celebrity philanthropy, it was the natural extension of his life philosophy. Use the blessings received to bless others. When you receive much, you have a responsibility to give back much, he said during the inauguration of a renovated court in an underprivileged Oakland neighborhood. These weren't empty public relations words. They were the genuine expression of a man who never forgot that his own journey was possible because others believed in him when he was just a skinny boy with a seemingly impossible dream. And perhaps this is Steph Curry's true magic. Not just the shots that defy physics, not just the titles that cement his place in history, but the way his story continues to inspire new stories, how his example opens doors to possibilities others couldn't even imagine. In a sports world often defined by cold statistics and clinical analyses, Steph brought back the human dimension, the emotional narrative, the connection between the athlete and the dreamer that exists in each of us. When he taps his chest and points to the sky after each shot, it's not a gesture of arrogance. It's a silent reminder of gratitude, a public reaffirmation that his journey was never solitary, that his strength comes from a deeper source than muscles and reflexes. I always try to play as if I'm being watched not just by fans today, but by everyone who told me I couldn't do it, he once confided. And mostly, I play as if my children are watching, because one day, when they face their own challenges, I want them to remember that their father never gave up. It is this living legacy, this continuous narrative of overcoming and reinvention, that makes Steph Curry something greater than an elite athlete. He has become a symbol, an archetype of human possibility. And as he continues his journey, shooting balls into increasingly distant baskets, millions around the world continue to find in his story not just entertainment, but inspiration. Not just a sports hero to admire from afar, but a tangible example of how to transform limitations into springboards for greatness. As he himself says, with the simplicity that characterizes him, sometimes you need to be small to prove you can be big. Don't let anyone diminish your ambition, deny your ability, or curtail your dreams. Some of the greatest glories are born from the greatest doubts. Steph Curry.